That would work. Yeah. So thank you very much. And it's fantastic that recording just started, so no one can see that. So thank you very much, Paul, for that. Welcome everyone. My name's Councillor Mundy, Chair of the Sustainable Communities Panel. Welcome this evening, watching not live, but also for attending in person. And I've just, before I go into apologies, just want to flag the order that I'll be taking the agenda. So taking the agenda as in order up to item 5. We won't take item 6, so that's planning enforcement. That item is just for next time. Then we'll start with item 11, which is the Clarion update, and then go on to item 10, which is Tenant Champion, and 7, 8, and 9. And I'll run through that as we go. Some colleagues, I know they've got an earlier pack in front of them, so maybe working off slightly different numbers, but I'll try to keep us on the ball here. Brilliant. So is there any, so from my understanding, we've got apologies, we've got Geraldine Stanford.
Apologies for absence from Geraldine Stanford, and Pauline Cowper has kindly agreed to substitute. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And also we've got Councillor David Dean, apologies, and Councillor Bennett, you're all speaking, you're in place. David, Daniel, is there anything else to add?
No, I'm dialing in today because I didn't want to spread any illness over people, so I'm staying at home today. But Councillor Bembo is subbing for Councillor Dean.
Amazing, great stuff. All right. So, do we have any declarations of interest? No. Minutes from the last meeting. Can we have a second for approving them? Thank you, Lakshmi. Action log. So that's pages 7 and 8. So I'm just looking at breaches and any ambers. Do we have any comments on that so far? So we've got an item on HGVs. Or do you want to flag that to us?
So thank you, Chair. The updates in HGVs from the previous meeting, the things were added to the website. One outstanding issue was that we provide residents with a link to London Lorry Control Scheme. That will happen shortly. Christy and myself had a meeting with London councils on Monday about how we may collaborate on enforcement of the London Lorry Control Scheme in Merton. So we'll get that updated for the next meeting.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Do we have any, just the only amber here so far is the overarching green space strategy. Chris or anyone, I don't think of any comments on that at all.
Nothing from me, Chair. John may have.
Thank you, Chair. In respect to that, we're building that as part of an outcome following the developing tree strategy, which is currently being undertaken as we speak, and further surveying of our parks infrastructure to help inform overarching parks strategy. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much, John. Okay, so if there's no comments or questions, we'll move on to the next item, which is performance monitoring. Particularly, focus on ambers, but I'm also particularly interested to hear a bit more about Veolia's performance as well. I understand that we may have implemented some action to support their performance heading in the right direction. And is that correct?
Chair, if I could perhaps just draw your attention to 2 or 3 indicators, and I'll come to the Veolia street cleaning one last. But usually we focus on 2 or 3 of interest. I'll be brief, but the first one, just to draw your attention to, is one which is shown as red on page 9 of your pack, which is around blue badge inspections. And this is an area where we've been hindered because of COVID in being able to undertake these inspections for obvious reasons. We're now starting to undertake those inspections, and they began again in January. And we're confident that we'll achieve the target by the end of March. So whilst it's red now, we do expect that to improve significantly. The second indicator is on page 13, and that's around leisure centres. And again, that's showing red. But again, you can see that there's some significant improvement in the number of leisure centre users in December 2021, which exceeded the monthly target. We hope and we expect that that will continue as we move out of the restrictions. And as you can see, that will have an impact on the financial return. And that's a testament really to the support that the authority gave GLL during the last 2 years in order to sustain their business and the services for our residents. The last one, and coming back to your point, is really in relation to an indicator on page 11, which is CRP 124 568, which shows that there has been, over the past few months, a significant reduction in the percentage of street reports rectified in time. Now, partly this is the speed of Veolia to be able to update the computer, but the other part of it is the reality on the ground in terms of a deterioration in the performance in street cleaning. And I'll hand over to John just to talk about the contractual process that we're now going through in order to seek an improvement, a significant improvement in this area.
Thank you. In terms of the next stages with Veolia, yesterday I issued a service improvement notice to Veolia in respect to the poor performance. It comprises 3 fundamental areas. One, which is the overall performance of the operations upon delivery. So when roads are swept, to what standard are those swept, in order to ensure that a grade A service delivery is done upon the completion of the road, and in order to maintain a B standard for a longer period. Then we discussed the rectification of service issues within the prescribed SLA. So as Chris discussed, that is directly correlated to that indicator, CRP 124, and then also the green bag removals across the borough in order to improve the standardization of the locations where they're presented, or alternative effective measures to record those so they're promptly removed as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Natasha, I didn't know if you had anything further to add.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity just to kind of speak. I think that measure that's in the pack that we're referring to kind of says a lot to me, because it says what Veolia does when things aren't right and how quickly they take action. And it's clear that it's not quick enough, and it's clear that it's deteriorated quite rapidly. So because of that and a number of other issues, that's why we've had to issue them with the service improvement notice. It's difficult. We all of us want to take pride in where we live. We all want cleaner streets, and we ask our residents to not dump rubbish. But when Veolia leave green sacks in places, it doesn't set the right tone. So I think giving them the opportunity to address those concerns directly and in a formal process and in a formal manner is the right thing to do. The council has invested significantly in improving street cleaning across the borough, because we know how important it is to our community. So the new street sweepers that we have, the mechanical sweepers that we have, and the way that the client team have changed how they do the inspection, so that there's far more rigor and there's far more data. That means it makes it easier to take this sort of thing to Veolia because there's clear evidence. the council's done all of that heavy lifting and done all that work, and now it's time, I think, for Veolia to meet the council halfway. And I look forward to hearing their response and seeing what their action plan will be in addressing our concerns. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much. Just actually looking at obviously the percentage, it's relatively low and it's been declining since July. Is this? I mean, clearly you've been eyeing this up for a while to put some action in. Do you have any? What do you think the next step's going to be?
Well, they've got. I think John can correct me if I'm wrong, but they've got 10 working days to respond to the issues we've raised. At that point, they have to also come to us with an action plan for how improvement is going to be, and then we'll have a agreed timetable in which we'll be able to check against certain benchmarks to see if that improvement has come along and if that work has been done. So that will be the next step, and I and officers at the council will be keeping a very close eye on what comes back and what is put forward, and holding them to account.
No, that's fantastic, and thanks for keeping us looped into the action you and officers are taking on that. I've got a question from Anthony. Anyone else? Anthony.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to ask about some of the annual targets and performance indicators, particularly on page 11, SP64 and SP269, which are percentage of residents satisfied with refuse collection and percentage of residents satisfied with street cleanliness, respectively. Obviously, there's been a big old drop in 21 to 22 in terms of people's perceptions of these things. Obviously, you're taking action sort of now, but I wanted to ask about the contractual variation, which I think was made in 2019-20 budget, which was an extra £1 million investment, was the way it was phrased, in the waste services, which was an effort to get Veolia to be able to meet the standards it originally agreed. And I just wondered what the assessment of the performance of that additional money was, bearing in mind the annual performance indicators on satisfaction from residents, and if there are any views on that.
Chris, is this maybe something you can ask, and maybe Natasha come in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in my initial response is it's hard to know what the performance would look like now had all 4 boroughs not invested in the Veolia service, because whilst that £1 million was not welcomed by any of the authorities, and the other boroughs put in significantly more in parts, it was at the time seen as absolutely necessary to sustain performance, and my estimate is that we would be seeing a much poorer performance at this point in time had that investment not been made, and we'll continue to apply the contract and seek the performance that residents are paying for as we go through certainly the next 12 months, which is critical really in reaching decisions around whether to extend the contract or to take other commissioning processes to ensure that we secure a value for money service.
And I'm happy to answer, Chair, if you'd like me to.
Yeah, please do.
So I think that investment was helpful in that, and I think we had. I know that you've pointed out collections as an issue there, but I think if we look back over the last couple of years, I would say there has been our kind of economies of scale that Veolia have given us has actually borne fruit, because during the pandemic, our collections from front doors and things like that were actually quite stable. We didn't suffer as much as other boroughs, even our neighbouring boroughs. So I think there have been elements where there's been a bit of a robustness that's been put into the system that's helped us weather certain storms, like literal storms, as of earlier this week. And we can't. I don't wish to kind of diminish that work, but I think when it comes to street cleaning, there is an inconsistency, because there are some streets actually in the borough that are pretty decent and pretty good, but there are others that are not. And I think what the next step in this process is to get that consistency across the borough, and to ensure that every street that we walk down is of a certain standard, and if it's not, it is correct, it's rectified within the allotted time and in the agreed time frame.
Thank you very much. So you've got Nigel, and sorry, John, do you want to add on some point on that? Sorry, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out, from my recollection, from the resident survey, which inputted into those figures, those two indicators actually improved, I think one by 1 percentage point, one by 5 percentage points from the previous resident survey. So during that period, there was a moderate increase, not a decrease. Thank you.
Thank you. That's good to know. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's not mentioned in there somewhere, but could you give me an update on the communal bin where the blocks of flats still having trouble with them being overflowed, and it seems to be a constant problem since last December. And the other issue has the new app called Fix My Street had made a difference in terms of your figures.
Thank you, Nigel. You picked one of my two favourite subjects there, which is the new Fix My Street app. So I'm very, very keen and want to get my hands on it. So blocks of flats, and has that been resolved? I know, Natasha, you were writing as part of one of the actions there, and Fix My Streets as well. Who wants to take that first? John, are you able to add some light on one of those?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In terms of the blocks of flats, that is a matter that that our waste manager is picking up with the Veolia, and working on a steady improvement plan in terms of improving that. There was depression in regards to the collection over the Christmas period. There was some relation or correlation to the availability of drivers due to drivers shortages and the impact of COVID during that period. However, that is something that we want to improve. We have spoken to the contractor in a face-to-face meeting to address that in order to put better rigor behind the routes that they have for maps for flats, and to serve those more efficiently, and record the ones that may have been omitted during the day's collection in order that they're promptly recollected. So that's something we've addressed within the service. In terms of Fix My Street and the reports going through Fix My Street, it's a program that we want to invest in and make certain improvements within its functionality, the customer journey throughout that. We are seeing a much more positive relationship with the customer in order of ease of accessibility and reporting issues. It's good to note that we are a very responsive council within Fix My Street. If you look at the main page on the website, and it lists the national councils that use it, we're typically either the leading authority in terms of responsiveness or at least in the top 5. So we have a good track record in this early days with the adoption of Fix My Street, which is very positive. So, but that is something we would definitely like to develop, because it gives us far greater business intelligence to what we're doing and where the issues are in our areas. Thank you.
No, thank you. And it's I was bending Natasha's ear over the weekend about adding additional things to it, and it'd be great to see that development pipeline, because as a user, I think it's fantastic to see it all come together. So if we can move on to next item, you've got. Indeed. So do you want to ask?
Thank you, Chair. I wondered on page 12, as we saw at the last Sustainable panel, Communities panel, the numbers on outdoor events in parks are rather larger than they have previously been. And I wondered why that was. It looks like possibly there's been a change in what's being recorded. And if so, when will that roll into the targets and what's the detail?
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. In terms of that report, we were unable to correct it at the time of this performance meeting. We have since corrected it in the next one. This unfortunately had included regular sporting events like football and the like, and rugby, sort of normal sporting days as events, which aren't events. So normal sporting activities and the renting of fields as a sporting activity is not determined an event. A gala or something like that, we may define as an event because it takes extra attention and investment on behalf of the service, and it's more of a one-off event or activity. So we just need to better define that in order to make the target more real. Thank you.
And thank you, Dan.
Hi, thank you. I would want to build on Councillor Bembo's question about recycling and communal blocks. One of the main complaints we keep receiving is on the percentage of recycling, and we've been aware for quite some time that communal blocks aren't having their recycling actually collected. It's been commingled with main waste or just left entirely. When does the service expect to get that service for recycling back to normal? And part of that is David Dean's standard question, which I'll ask because he's not here, why you failed to meet your recycling target again.
Thank you, Chair. In respect to the first part of your question, I will need to research that and provide you a response outside of this meeting to make sure the detail in which I provide is accurate. I want to check with the service provider and our head of waste in respect to what the progress is on that before I comment fully. In terms of the recycling percentage, the December rate is typically, because of Christmas and the amount of waste people generate in Christmas, because this is a percentage of household waste collected, there is typically an increase in the amount of waste households generate over a holiday period, which depresses your recycling rate. It's just mathematically, December is one of the lowest months in terms of recycling performance, as it's a percentage. In terms of the annual overall impact of recycling, that value is next to the target value of 45%. We have 42.16 at this stage, which is at this stage, and due to the impacts of COVID with the increase in residual waste, because once again, that is expressed as a percentage of total household waste arising, is the progress has been made. It's been quite positive. Food waste increases in terms of recycling are significant, but we do need to, we need further support from the community in regards to separation of recycling and recycling as well in certain areas. As part of the previous report we gave to this committee, looking at the areas of where we had improvements to make in certain recyclable activities in that regard.
Thank you, John. If it would be helpful if you can, when you review that, if you can circulate just a line or two around to everyone, it'd just be helpful. Okay, so let's move on to the next item, everyone. So on the agenda I'm working off, we're item 11. So that's the Clarion update. And we've got Marek and Vicky from Clarion, who's going to kindly give us an update on the progress both of the regen side, but also on the repair side. Is it Marek, you going first, kicking off?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Councillor. So we circulated the report to councillors. Hopefully you received it last Friday. I don't intend on going through the whole report in detail, but it does provide updates on all 6 of the work streams that I communicated last month. There's 3 items in particular within the report I'd like to draw your attention to, and that's the preparation for the Resident Engagement Day. We're starting at Sadler's in a week's time. It's well underway. We're currently on site doing baselining surveys. That's getting a feel for resident sentiment, their general perception of us, the service, of their community, and drawing in those wider challenges we have within the community, what they would like to see in terms of opportunities, skills, bringing in our Clarion Futures colleagues. That's going really well. We've been baselining for 2 weeks, and as at the end of the first week, we'd already spoken to and completed surveys with over 25% of the residents on Sadler's. So that's quite encouraging. Pardon me. The other 2 items are the Eastfields roof. This week, residents would have been receiving a letter from us outlining our proposals in respect of re-roofing the estate, which is the continuous membrane across the buildings, which will hopefully stop some of the intermittent leaks that we've been experiencing there. The proposed solution is outlined, and we are inviting comments from residents. We do hope to be on site at Sadler's with a pilot portion of the roof works by the end of March. After the pilot portion is concluded, we very much hope that other leaseholders, other freeholders on the estate will be able to see the net result, the effect of it, the quality of it, and that may negate some of the negativity in terms of us being able to complete the work properly. And the only other item I would like to draw your attention to is the Eastfields Porter Cabin, which is now in place and is opening tomorrow. So after some soft testing this week and next, we'll write out to Eastfields residents to notify them of opening hours and of the fact that they can drop in there now. I'm happy to answer any questions on any other aspects of the report.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much. I've got a question, but I just wanted to open the floor to see if there's any questions, and we'll take them in 3. Does anyone else have a point to make? No, I mean, my point, no, thank you for your report. My point was actually about the level of building off your first work stream about engagement. I wondered how do you see in the medium term the task and finish groups for both the High Path and Eastfields Estate tying into the work that you're doing overall, and what has been the feedback you've had so far on those, and what is the sort of consequences of that feedback?
Sorry, Councillor, can I just clarify, feedback from the task and finish groups themselves, or feedback from the
on them as an entity, as a function, as a way of engaging with both councillors and resident associations?
Okay, so in terms of the resident engagement days, obviously we're co-creating these with the Merton Community Panel, who have helped us design the survey. They've helped us kind of shape some of our approach and some of the communications up to now. They've obviously chosen the order. They've rearranged the order somewhat, which we're absolutely happy with, because their thoughts and their thought process behind starting at Sadler's was a very good one. The link to your question there with the task and finish groups is that a lot of the people that sit on Merton Community Panel are really well versed with the task and finish groups. Certainly a lot of the panel members have been heavily involved with Watermead's task and finish groups around refuse and recycling, which is probably one of the most positive examples of us working with London Borough of Merton, with Councillor Irons, with Veolia, to really educate and solve a problem that the estate has been suffering from for a very, very long time. So the residents kind of see both the reward from both the resident engagement days. They're really shaping it. There are some excellent and really positive suggestions that have gone into how we're going to approach this first one, and obviously there'll be a bundle of lessons learned with the Merton Community Panel after we conclude this first one, albeit, as I say, the conclusion of it is 3 or 4 months away. The engagement day itself is just the start of that, but they also see the value in the task and finish process, and certainly on the other big task and finish groups at Eastfields, at High Path, and at Harlands. I think the big success and the beauty of the task and finish process is how quick results can be delivered and can be seen and can be evidenced. And you know, certainly on Eastfields and High Path, there has been some very positive feedback. I get a report from Carmen, who schedules the task and finish groups. They recommend either follow-up actions, new task and finishes, perhaps moving the same group onto different estates. We're experiencing the same problems, but there's always a lessons learned report that comes off the back of that. I suspect what will happen after the resident engagement days is we will sit down with the MCP and with our colleagues and come up with a full action plan where there's many quick wins, but we'll also come up with, you know, longer term strategies around skills, around worklessness, around engaging youth, which will become projects under Clarion Futures in their own right. And then there'll be further task and finish groups that get generated from other comments, other concerns. And I suspect, I can already guess, given some of the comments in the first week around Sadler's, that there will be some form of task and finish groups around, you know, the future of the undercrofts and lighting and perhaps other parts that are being drawn to our attention.
I mean, I think the key for us is that these estate days are very iterative. So we're doing one and we're learning from it and then using that to finesse how we do the next one. But at the same time, they're quite bespoke. So if we know of a particular issue, then we will want to have an estate day which captures, you know, which works best for each estate. But as Marek says, we are heavily involving the Merton Community Panel. And just to give you an example of that sort of iterative approach, when we did the Eastfields Estate Engagement Day last summer, we didn't do a baselining survey, and actually we've learned that that would have been much better, and that's why we are doing a baselining survey this time for the Sadler's event. So we are, every time we do one, we are trying to finesse it and take best practice forward.
No, thank you very much. As someone who's been on the sort of Eastfields task and finish, or both of them, but predominantly on Eastfields task and finish group, it's interesting to see their evolution, and it's helpful to understand your vision for their next steps in your wider engagement plan. Are there any further questions from the panel? I've got one further follow-up on just on the waste side of things. I mean, could you elaborate further about the steps you have taken and the changes you've implemented to improve the waste? And I don't know, what are the next steps for you in that journey to make it even better?
And again, just one point of clarity, do you mean on Watermeads or in general across Merton?
Sorry, I mean, in my understanding, the waste challenge is predominantly across the borough, but if you're focusing on specific areas, then please just give us some further details.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, Watermeads was an interesting challenge, and Councillor Irons probably can add far more than I can, but that was really about some of the upcoming changes and educating residents in the use of the various bins, especially where we have blocks, which I think, you know, we'll be learning for, you know, the Clarion regions, as well as wider Merton, really, of how we can involve residents, teach them to use the correct bins. We have big challenges where communal bin stores are in place, because, you know, on a street property, contamination of one bin or another, you can easily target who's contaminating those. On estates, it's a far bigger problem. The engagement day, the task and finish down at Watermeads, has produced some really positive behaviours and a very, very high degree of compliance with the regulations. We're now getting to the stage on that task and finish groups where there are some, or a couple of blocks in particular, we now need to take to the next stage, which is, you know, from a kind of a pilot view, quite interesting as to how we now look to enforce incorrect behaviours. So that will be the next stage of that pilot. More widely across Merton, I mean, we had our performance meeting with Councillor Welton yesterday. We raised directly with Merton any issues we have with collections. We have a very responsive conversation with the councillor and colleagues from London Borough of Merton. We're trying to assist where we can, making sure that we report any missed collections out and about in the estates, and try and work with both Chris Lee and Councillor Welton to try and address that. And I mean, just over the last month, we've seen really quite significant improvements in waste collection at the Eastfields estate. We do still have our team skimming some of the bins, but that's generally about volume rather than missed collections now. So I think that's a great example of how that wider liaison with our colleagues has really helped to improve performance there.
Brilliant. No, thank you for adding that that colour and that further background and clarity on sort of your take on the relationships. And you know, I understand how it's grown as well with officers and as you say, cabinet members. Does anyone have any additional questions before we move on to the next item? No. Thank you very much, Vicky and Marek, for your time and producing this report. Thank you again. So we're on to the next item. So that's item 10. So that's the Tenant Champion. So this item came about because our Tenant Champion, who's also a panel member, has written a report to updating us on the progress of his role, and I'll ask him to have some brief comments on the report. I thought it was helpful to build off his excellent report to summarise what action we could take as a panel and formulate that into recommendations, which you can all see there. And there's an addendum to recommendation B as well, which you should all have. Why don't we hear from Nick first, and then throw the item open for questions. Nick, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think the report does very largely speak to itself. I do have to say in starting that on page 2 of the supplementary, it's a bit confusing this because my report's actually recorded 3 times, but page 2 of the supplementary, detail 2/3, to the best of my recollection, I was given a fairly free hand in how I put together the champion job, rather than what is actually sort of stated here. But to the report itself, I'm going to start off completely away from the report. You may have read today that in southeast London somewhere, Peabody Trust found that a tenant had been dead for 2 years within their flat, and there'd been 40 to 50 complaints, according to tenants, other tenants, about the smell and everything, and they'd done nothing about it, and they only found out about it because a window was open during the storm. And your first reaction is, good grief, how can a housing association do something as awful as that? And the second considered thing is, yeah, this sort of thing does happen. If it had been a private tenant, we would never have heard a thing about it. We would certainly never have got onto Peabody. This whole report, colleagues, is about private tenants. Okay, I have had some complaints about Clarion. I've had some complaints about other housing associations as well. They've been, relatively speaking, few. The complaints that I've had, in the most part, have been about private tenants. And for private tenants, there is nothing like the comeback that tenants of people like Clarion have. I have an update for you, and that is on case 1, which I put in my sample casework on page 6 there. I actually went to visit the person in question again yesterday. I've had tremendous help from one of her local councillors. I've had tremendous help from housing themselves, but what she's still being bullied. And when housing turned around and said, no, you've got to find her somewhere else to live. You can't just chuck her out in the street while you do your repairs. He turned around and said, well, I can do, there's nothing in law to stop me. And he's absolutely right. Whereas if you're in Clarion, you've got to find somewhere else to put you want to do that anyway, because you're a housing association. If you're a private landlord, you don't have any of those things. The only comeback you have is say, well, you have to pay the tenant back the rent. And of course, they can do that in arrears. So the woman could have been chucked out on the street with her 3 children, without any money, without anywhere to go, without even any English in this particular case. And that, colleagues, is happening here and now in our borough. And this is just scratching the surface, because most people are too scared to actually complain. This person who complained here actually only complained secondhand. She broke down in a shop, and the shopkeeper was actually the person that did the complaining for me, right? Now, as you can hear, I genuinely do believe that there is a case for a tenant's champion. And I say it, what I actually say, I sincerely hope that some sort of champion system is retained, if only for the private sector tenants, the least regulated and the most vulnerable of all our many tenants. That is the truth of it. We probably aren't going to do that. We're what the recommendations here are to produce metrics and stuff like that about whether repairs have been done by Clarion or whatever. We probably will continue, because that's our nature, we're politicians. We probably will continue to bang on about Clarion, and if we get Clarion sorted out, we'll bang out about Wandle or somebody else like that, because they're easy targets. This is what's really happening in our borough, and this is why you need a tenant's champion. I do genuinely believe that it's got to be an officer rather than a councillor, and I do believe that if we have that officer there, that we as councillors have to agree to pull back from the kind of work that we do in chasing the housing associations. Not to, we can take an overview, we can look at it, but we can't try to replace the systems which are in place by the housing associations to get the work done. We can't just turn around and sort of say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you've got to get it done, you've got to get it done tomorrow. The people that need our help are in the private sector. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you for your the efforts you've placed on the role. during your time and as you continue to take on that role until the election. So we've got 2 hands up. Does anyone else? Is there a third? All right, I'll add a question at the end. So Anthony, then Nigel, and myself. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nick, for your report. I'm heartened by the case studies. It seems quite clear to me that you performed a useful help to the people that have got in contact with you, which of course was hopefully the point of this, and hopefully to learn the lessons of how we might, or Merton might, assist other tenants. I'm both heartened but also surprised by the assertion around Clarion being an easy target and things like that, because of course, as the proposer of the motion and the writer of the motion, there was a very distinct guide that this was also about private sector tenants, which I'm pleased you've taken up. And in fact, those of you who've been on the panel since 2018 will remember that I have routinely raised the issue of private sector tenants in this body and usually been pushed aside in the reports as something that we don't really deal with. And I'm pleased to see that's hopefully changing. My quick question was actually around learning from the other place that we talked about that does something like this, not the same, but something like it, which was Richmond. The idea being that we might learn some lessons about how theirs worked and we might do ours differently. You do mention Richmond, but I'd be interested to know who you spoke to at Richmond. I know there's a thing in the action log about the cabinet member and the chair of the panel joining with you to discuss this and investigate it with Richmond. And I think there was some discussion of a sort of an officer to officer discussion as well. So I'm just wondering if you might have any more detail around that.
Thank you. Nigel. Nigel, we can take it in threes. It's all right.
Thank you. First thing is, my mom done with this. I do share same experience, because I deal with a lot of cases on the high past estate area. Anyway, I've got a few questions. Did you actually follow through the procedure from when a case is reported or a complaint made, and it goes through the channels as claim, and then for some reason it gets lost somewhere. It gets lost, and I find this very frustrating, because some cases are not so for weeks or months. I must say that, but I do understand how hard it is for claim, because they are a major firm, and they are paying attention on a larger scale. But some individuals must have some urgent cases, such as a water leak. Would it be easy just hire a private contractor, then getting a contractor for Luna, because it takes days. I don't know why. And I could go on, but my question is, did you follow the procedure from point A to point Z when it be served? My second question, you were commenting about taking over of the champion. Yes, it is possible, and of course, party might be ideal, but how am I including a resident who represent a certain building, and that resident you were closely, okay, I got this guy upstairs who's still waiting. Can you really eat up quickly? Because and yeah, I could go on because I learned so much in the last 4 years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Can I just summarise that? So I think the first one was about Nick following the user journey from A to Z in terms of a customer. Was your second point about?
Sorry.
Yeah, so another option to take on that cap. Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I'll recap at the end. So my question, Nick, was about, could you just give us more of a flavour, a granular flavour about sort of the hours per week you did, and because if that's appropriate, because it seems like a lot of this was a lot of hard graft by you, working with stakeholders and relationship building, and it will just add a bit more colour to the practical element and probably speak to Nigel's question again. So again, working in reverse order, Nigel's two questions, one on following the process to A to B to understand customer frustration, and then also talking about other options. How did you come up with those three proposals, and anything else considered? And Anthony's point about Kingston, if that was correct, and I think it's predominantly the undertone is how far has the original motion been successfully implemented, so to speak.
Great. Okay, I'm going to answer them in the sequence where they were put. First of all, Richmond, not Kingston. I don't think.
Apologies, my help.
I wouldn't rely on Kingston for anything, quite honestly. But Richmond, it's quite an interesting thing that was actually put together. I'm going to confess from the beginning that I read this all from the website. It was actually put together while the point the stock was transferred across around 10 years ago by the then Conservative Council. And the idea of the champion was to make sure there were residents associations that she formed to work with the council to make sure that, first of all, the transfer went across as planned, and on an ongoing basis to make sure that that the residents remained happy. And when power transferred, so the job was transferred, and I believe expanded a bit as well. But that was never going to be what we were going to do in Merton. First of all, well, I was going to do in Merton, sorry. First of all, because we had all those things developed during our stock transfer. We did that. Whether we did it successfully or not, another matter, but we did it. And as you'll know, that started off in Merton Priory Homes, which turned into Circle Housing, which then turned into Clarion, and things have moved on and changed every single time. I might have to say I much preferred personally the original Merton Priory Homes way of doing things, which did involve face-to-face tenants, but it was expensive and it was complicated. I'm not going to plead on Clarion's behalf for the cost of maintaining a really complicated thing, but it is there, it's a factor. So I looked at it and I thought, no, hang on, this is not our priority. Our priority is to actually make sure those repairs get done, and our priority is to move along with that. Which takes you on to the procedure A to Z. Actually, believe it or not, I actually helped create the procedure. The procedure was already by and large there, as Vicky will tell you. It was, and it's a good process for Clarion. But doing it, actually going through it, can take months. Most complaints do get dealt with very, very quickly indeed. Clarion will tell you that. And I have to say, from my experience as cabinet member, even when it was still Circle and that most things did get done, it's easy to shake your head, because what we hear about is the things that don't. There are thousands and thousands of tenants, and we hear about the dozen or so that don't get dealt with effectively. There is a process, and if we don't follow that process, they are a privately run, they're not private, but they are a privately run company. They're not part of the council. If we don't follow that process, we don't get things done. So I have helped them put together the process, only for very marginally, and to the best of my understanding, the process is being followed. You can ask Vicky, you can ask Clarion generally what they think of the process as it works as well. Okay. As far as getting a volunteer, it's quite an interesting one. So not using a councillor, not using an officer, using volunteers from the resident. I cannot see that's going to work. The one problem with a volunteer, and this is unlike a councillor, is a volunteer can always turn around and say, no, I'm a volunteer, I'm not going to do that. And it happens. I know, we've all been volunteers. Like, look, wearing a volunteer badge myself. If you're going to do this job, you're going to do it properly, and to do it properly, my belief is you need an officer to do it, because we as councillors are fallible, and as often as not, we don't know much enough about the job anyway. Our officers, I know they're sitting here today, but our officers, first of all, they have to go through a recruitment process which actually shows that they know what they're talking about. And second of all, you wouldn't work in local government unless you really wanted to achieve things. And our officers, I genuinely believe, do want to achieve those things. And I think an officer, given the chance, would do so. Okay, then last of all, the hours per week. I'm going to be quite honest with you. I have not done as many hours per week as the job needs. I personally believe it's a full-time job. I would say that I have done, it's almost impossible to say, isn't it? Because, you know, you can have a week where very little happens, and then you can have a week where you're stuck on the wrong end of a telephone call to somebody who's absolutely desperate for hours on end. And from time to time, that person will have nothing to do with the brief, but will nevertheless be desperate. So there is all that kind of work that's involved in it as well. But I would say, I would personally think that it's a full-time job, but if we're not sure that it's a full-time job, there is always that opportunity to share with other boroughs, because just because things happen in Merton doesn't mean to say they don't happen elsewhere. I take you back to Peabody, which didn't happen in this borough, thank goodness, and I rest my case on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick. Final quick round of questions. Anthony, Daniel, I'm just flagging to you. Do you want to come in at all?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Cool, no worries. And then we'll just wrap up for recommendation then, Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is more a comment than a question. Is that okay to take that now? Thank you, and thank you for your reply, Nick. I think the general comment I wanted to make here was, I think what we learn from this is that there is something valuable in the work you've been doing. I think that comes through from the report, but equally, it highlights that this needs to be properly resourced, and I think that was always going to be the challenge. And I hope that comes through in the recommendations and the amended recommendation. Obviously, it'll be a decision for Cabinet in due course how to resource this, or if to resource it. I would make I know you've made a sort of fairly strong push for pushing this role to the officers. If I might take your time, I'd make I'll make a push for some version of a councillor's champion with properly resourced support, if only because we all do casework, and I've in fact picked up 5 or 6 bits of Clarion casework from across the borough in the last sort of couple of months, as well as my usual stuff, including private sector tenants as well. You know, officers do all the work already. Ward councillors help oil the wheels. They make sure things get done, answers get delivered, where there are problems, they get resolved, make the right people talk to the right people. And it seems to me that's exactly what the role of the housing, of the Tenants Champion is. And in fact, that is exactly what you've been doing. So I would make a push from that we don't just say it's an officer responsibility, we keep some accountability and we help oil the wheels. And that's my plea, but obviously it's Cabinet's decision in due course. At the end.
Oh, thank you very much, Anthony. Before we go on to recommendations, do John, Elliot or Martin have anything to add to this? Go on, John.
Oh, well, thank you, Councillor Mundy. I'd just like to thank Councillor Draper for his report. Officers weren't cited of the report in the covering report prior to publication, and we'd like some more time to study the report. But I would just like to pick on one of the little points that Councillor Draper raised and provide some assurance to members. And I'll go back to Elliot Brunton's first report that he presented to you on the 18th of January in the work of the Housing Enforcement Team. The report updated members that Merton has got 22 registered housing providers with approximately about 12,500 homes. Those regulated providers, that's the important point, regulated providers. There's a housing regulator that oversees the regulated providers, and there's a statutory process for complaints. That's a statutory housing complaints process with an ombudsman that the local authority cannot get involved in, because that's not our process. And Councillor Draper spoke about that the private sector tenants don't have recourse to that same regulator or to that statutory complaints process. There are 28,000 approximately private rented properties in Merton, and the majority of those landlords are good landlords and provide good housing and a good service. It is the ones, of course, that aren't good that the Housing Enforcement Team spend a lot of their time working with. And as Councillor Draper said, that is one of the issues that we face on a daily basis. But we welcome the report, we'll study the report, and we'll meet with Councillor Draper to go through the report in more detail.
Brilliant, thank you very much, John. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take this opportunity of thanking Councillor Draper for the work he has undertaken as the Tenants Champion. There's some really worrying stories that I think we have heard tonight, and it's commendable in terms of the support he has given to those private sector tenants who do have relatively little rights and are some of the people who are in most desperate need here in Merton. Is something I recognise as Cabinet member in terms of private sector conditions, and it's why we are undertaking work on the possible introduction of a selective landlord licensing scheme here in Merton. It won't address every single thing, but it will allow a level of regulation into the sector, because I do think it needs to be better regulated overall, and I think that's something that does need to happen. But obviously, as a council, we will see more of that work coming forward over the next few months. But obviously, I would like to also thank this opportunity of thanking Scrutiny for their work as well. And obviously, we will consider any recommendations which are put forward by Scrutiny tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think you're exactly right, and it'd be good also if the panel would join me in acknowledging Nick's contribution to this area, and we can minute that as part of our official response to this item as well, because it's a very complicated area and everyone can have their own view on what should and shouldn't be done, but someone stood up to the plate, and that was Councillor Draper. So very grateful for that. Talking to the recommendations in front of us, would it be helpful if I went through them, or would that be useful to give some context? Or do you colleagues feel they're sufficiently informed enough to agree? So I can just briefly run through. So just to give some background. So I think, so if we go through A to F, remember on your supplementary paper, there is an amendment to B. So notwithstanding the point John raised previously, and would welcome him and his team's further input as if they do pass and move on to the next stage to cabinet. We heard Nick's point about the actual tremendous involvement of stakeholders and the intensity and knowledge you need to have. And this clearly shows there need to be an additional review of resources to housing enforcement. And that's hopefully something John and Elliot would welcome in terms of growing that. I'm very conscious also from their business plan, their distresses on the department as well. And any additional resources possible would be hopefully supported. B, the clarification you've got on your separate paper just effectively means that the intended motion passed in full council would be enacted in full. So you would have 4 years trial, as it were, and then it's Cabinet's decision, as it always has been, to decide whether to continue the Tenants Champion as a councillor or reconstitute it under a different form with resource to support that. And as we heard from Nick, this is what's kind of needed to grow it, or you would reconfigure it under officers. Point C relates to a previous report from Elliot and team referenced the Merton's housing enforcement policy. And from our understanding last time, it was unclear how, while there is a regulatory framework for registered providers, there is also legislation about inspection as well and housing standards. So how does this get traversed into a very clear, distinct map to residents, to us, so we know who's responsible? And I just draw colleagues' attention back to our first paper, where we had the list of cases from Siobhan Madonna outstanding, and it shows that there is a lot of opportunity for stakeholder engagement, not necessarily the stick, but a lot of the work of joining the dots up. And again, this clearly sounds like a need for increased capacity to enable that to happen. Part D relates to performance, and the reality that we don't actually have that included in our performance metrics. So how do we have visibility so that it's not the TV as the first port of call or a newspaper article, but we keep a regular drumbeat understanding where the inspections are happening, and where possible, what additional support can we call for John, Elliot and his team as well. We also heard previously from Elliot and his predecessor Steve about MIRHAG and the importance of potentially bringing that back, and it's worth asking Cabinet to review that, as how can we use a more of a softer approach in stakeholders. You wouldn't have been probably watching, but overview the Overview and Scrutiny Commission the other week had several items about engaging with housing associations, particularly for violence against women, and the council's work in that regard. But there is, apart from Clarion, there seemed to be little engagement with the sector. Opportunities like this forums to bring that together would help other policies as well. And finally, I mean, we heard the great work Nick has done, but it was just a drop in the ocean to make this work together to identify the hotspots, both in the private and registered sector where appropriate. We really need to think about how this is communicated so that we can safely and consciously feel that we've fulfilled our obligation, both morally, but also to the letter. So that's the outline and background thinking, and I've spoken to many of you outside this meeting, and thank you very much for putting up with me bending your ear. Is there any questions on what I've just outlined? No? Oh, Nick, go for it.
Not a question, it's just how I'm going to take this. Recommendation A, yeah, it needs to be reviewed. You're absolutely right. Of course it needs to be reviewed. And yeah, by the end of calendar year 2022, that's not a bad idea. And I've looked at your update. The first wording wasn't right, but the updated point B, yeah, I'm going to vote for that one. I'm not going to vote for C because it's all about housing associations and it's about inspecting and auditing repairs reported. I mean, you know, that is an immense task. It's a task which will actually take people's eye away from what's actually truly needed. You know, we're not looking for auditing, we're just looking for things being right. I'm not going to be voting for D either, because quarterly metrics, I can't see what they're going to do, frankly. And as far as E and F are concerned, I'm going to abstain on those. Not because there's anything wrong with them, because I genuinely don't know enough about them. I mean, I think bringing Merhag back would be great, but whether it's technically feasible is another matter. So I'm going to abstain on those two. Okay.
Thank you, Nick. I was hoping to pass them all as a, or to put them to you as a slate, but I'm more than happy to go through them as A, B, and C for your benefit. So, thank you. Why don't we then start with A? So, can I have all those in favour of recommendation A? Against? Sorry, Nigel, are you for or against recommendation A? For. And not voting? Okay. No, so Nigel's not voting on A. Yeah, so abstaining on A. Recommendation B? Apologies, thank you, Dave. So the result was A was passed.
I just want to be clear, Councillor Holden is not in the chamber, so we should not be counting his vote. And
we're not voting, we're not counting his vote. Yeah. Brilliant. So let's move on to. So 6 in favour of A, apart from Nigel, and Nigel was then abstaining. Dan is online. Brilliant. Recommendation B, or as amended on the side paper. All those in favour? Yeah. Against? Not voting? Thank you. C. All those in favour? All those against? Not voting? Okay, so that motion that hasn't passed. Okay. I do have casting vote. Can we just confirm the numbers on that, Stella, please? Okay, so casting vote then. Thank you. Recommendation D. All those in favour? All those against? All those not voting? Lakshmi, are you voting or non-voting? Thank you. Recommendation E. All those in favour? All those against? All those not voting? So it's passed. And recommendation F. All those in favour? All those against? All those against? And all those not voting? Okay. That's an odd one. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate your time and effort we've put into this, not only this evening, but also previous panel meetings as well. Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, if I go through, so we're recommending A, B, C, D didn't pass. So there's been no metrics to scrutiny. E and F passed. Yes, it's the amended B. And you've got that by email, Stella. Cool. Should have a copy by email. Cool. Thank you.
Before we finish on the item, I'm grateful for the amount of time we've taken on it. I'm very aware that there's really very little about the private sector in these recommendations. Would you consider putting on another of your excellent recommendations, specifically asking about the private sector? Or are we going to continue to concentrate on Clarion?
I don't think we're continuing to concentrate on Clarion, but from what the cabinet member told us is that we're instituting a licensing regime, which will give us greater teeth on the private sector. If there is a gap in that you can identify, do tell us now. So the cabinet member told us 5 minutes ago that we're instituting a licensing regime, which will give us greater teeth when dealing with private sector landlords. If there is a gap in what's being provided or proposed, if you can identify that and tell us, that would be amazing. And I am no doubt we can get the support of the panel behind it. Okay, quickly, Anthony, Nigel, and then we move on.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if it's helpful, but the original full council motion did talk about the private sector as well. And the new recommendation B talks about the original full council motion being taken to its year's trial end. So as far as I see it, the private sector is definitely there as part of that and should be taken into account by Cabinet.
Agreed. It's not front and centre, but it's there somewhere in the background, somewhere behind our concerns about Clarion, etc.
Nigel, final word.
Thank you. I agree because in the private sector, I have come across several cases that are freeholders of a massive, tour block for leaseholders, and the freeholder is just simply just taking advantage of them for quick money, quick profit, and the leaseholders are kept in the dark. And etc. I think this needs to be addressed more.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, final, and then we will need to move on. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. I wondered if a solution to the point that Nick raises might be for the panel to reconsider recommendation D, which actually does talk to the private sector and in terms of accountability of the work that the team are doing in relation to the private sector.
I would second that, yeah.
I'm not necessarily keen on the word metrics, but our job is, of course, to hold the council to account, and part of the way we do that is by looking at the metrics. That's why we look at the performance monitoring. So, I'm definitely in agreement with you that what we want to do is we want to make sure that there is more support for private sector tenants. I wrote the motion that this is about. I talked about the private sector. I've been talking about the private sector tenants since 2018 in this panel. So it's not that I'm not keen on this. It's just I'm hoping to try and offer you a way forward to meet the point that you validly raised. And that's within our wheelhouse. Accountability is what we do.
Dave.
Thank you, Chair. With respect, we've got 6 recommendations before us. We've just voted on all of them, and all those have been decided. I can't remember any meeting of council or anybody where you decide 6 items and then you go back and say, actually, let's go back and decide that again, even though we've just voted on it. I mean, I know what I do in planning committee. As soon as a vote is taken and the decision is made, we move immediately to the next item. We've given this an hour and a half now. I move next item.
It's still possible to add an additional recommendation if a committee member requests it.
I think we can move on now, but I just on Dave's point, this has been a very, very challenging topic, and the charge by Nick, rightly so, was that we need to focus on the private sector. What is, I think, a question for those probably reviewing this meeting and for many on the panel is, how can you achieve those aims if you don't know what activity is going on that we can just leave for your own understanding and consciousness? Anyway, we are moving on. Sorry, Nigel, let's move on. So design review panel. Who is going to be leading off in that first? Brilliant. So if you wouldn't mind briefly presenting, and no doubt we'll have many, many questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible and leave as much time for questions. Almost a year ago to a day, we were here and we presented a report to yourselves explaining how we would go about reviewing the work of the panel. That's in one of the appendices, appendix 1, sorry. And we committed to consulting the panel members following that and coming back to this panel, which is what we're doing now. So basically, from about April, we engaged with panel members, produced 3 pieces of work proposing the changes, basically a code of conduct, the actual changes, and a recruitment process. And over a period of a number of months, we got responses from 15 out of 20 of the panel members, which is quite a high response rate. Just before I go on to the results of that, I think it's just worth us recapping just what the panel's done. It's been in operation for 15 years. It's undertaken 302 reviews for 195 different sites, and 110 of these have now been implemented and or are under construction. Basically 21% got red, 53% got amber, and 26% got green. Excuse me, I'm between glasses, so I'm going like this. So it's not going to be a slick presentation, I'm afraid. Okay, the appendices 2, 3, and 4 are basically the documentation which we asked panel members to comment on. Excuse me. Okay, so to the responses. Overall, the response is very positive. Panel members generally supported the proposals. They obviously had their own individual take on it and so on. We've proposed a few changes based on that. There was probably only one panel member who was sort of stood out and had a different particular view on that, on the proposals, but there was a lot of good stuff in his response, which we can take on board. So basically, the key changes which we're proposing are to pay panel members and charge applicants, and to have a design expert as the chair instead of a councillor. And although there was some support for having a councillor as chair, the majority was in favour of a design expert. But we've built into the proposals how some of the concerns over how a design expert chair could work, how it could go wrong, how we can actually make sure that it goes right, and that's included in the report as well. Another, I think I'm going to concentrate on just one particular point, which is relevant to Merton, which we've changed. There's many ways you can actually identify sites, and there's guidance on how to do that. And most panels will review one scheme per review, and that means you can have a site visit. But mostly these schemes are larger schemes. In Merton, we rely on small schemes on difficult sites in the main predominantly for our housing. So I think the design review panel has to ensure that it's capable of reviewing those smaller schemes. And so we're not proposing to have actual site visits or one scheme per review, but we are going to extend the period available and to ensure that panel members go on site themselves, and that the applicant does a sort of like a site visit, a virtual site visit at the actual meeting. So, okay, there's two other things which I think is probably important to point out. One is the proposals to update the website, which will enable us to be very more efficient, enable to work well with the charging regime, so applicants can upload their information themselves and pay online, which will be more efficient for us working, and to be more flexible about how we actually operate the panel. So that is to not have such a rigid structure, meetings every 2 months or whatever, and it to be more responsive to applicants. That's something feedback we've got from panel members who are often applicants and from applicants themselves. We also talk in the report a bit about how the status of the panel and how how transparent and open it is, because there are issues with that at the moment, and there are proposals in there how to deal with that on various levels. The guiding document is this from CABE, and I was checking that and against what our proposals are. I think in terms of how we deal with pre-applications and how we deal with the how the public attend and view the panel and its work, I think basically we are actually adhering to that, because it says we have to behave in a certain way, but it doesn't dictate how we do that. I think I'll probably leave it at that. The rest of the report hopefully speaks for itself, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, and it was a quite thorough report, and it was really interesting to read the detailed feedback from the panel, and I've got several comments on it as well. Just want to open up questions to the floor. Does anyone want to kick off first? Dave, Anthony, and then Nigel. Dave.
It's less a question than a comment on the report, and I'm just going to stick to the design expert chair section. I am chair of Planning Applications Committee. Before I became chair, it was routine for the previous chair to chair Design Review Committee. On taking over as chair, I did chair the first one, possibly two, but then not because I didn't want to give the time, but I just felt it was wholly inappropriate for someone who is a elected and political decision maker on planning issues to be chairing what is an expert panel of design experts, and so since that time I gave across the responsibility of chairing either to my vice chair or to an officer to deal with the design review panel. And I think that's important that all councillors, the 10 currently who sit on planning committee, to take a step back from this process. And I think that's really important. The most important thing that I was proposing when we first started this review, and that we have come out with, is the design expert chair, and removing myself in this case, but obviously won't be in the future, but removing the chair of planning committee and any councillor and any political involvement in the decisions on what rating to give any particular application that comes before the panel. I think that's really important. I'm absolutely delighted that the review and proposal is to do that, and I'll wholeheartedly support that.
Thank you, Dave. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I think there's a lot of great stuff in here and a lot to support. I had a question, or two slight questions. One is around the comparative data on other local authorities' design review panels, but I think you referred to the CABE manual. My other question is about daytime meetings. Now, I can understand the need for daytime meetings for the members of the panel, but I wondered if you'd noticed an impact on the attendance at pre-application meetings of ward councillors. I know as a ward councillor, it can be very difficult to take a relatively last-minute daytime meeting to attend something that's going to impact my ward. And I just wondered if you'd noticed any drop-off in attendance of councillors to those.
And Nigel, can I do a roundup?
Thank you, Chair. Is it possible to advise appointing an independent chair that has no links with future merchant and any parties, but someone who's neutral. And also, I noticed the panel is to be scaled down to 5 people and the share. Is it possible for any application, probably major one, to have a local resident come in and attending the experts what the local area is like, because if you just suddenly just flush in a tall block building and you're sure these experts probably don't live in the area and they would you be interested to see the impact? And my second question is oh yeah, lost the page.
Why don't we, I can come. Thank Nigel. Nigel, what? Cool. Yeah, no, I was going to say we're going to do one more round if it's helpful. So just recapping. So you've kind of stolen one of my questions actually, Nigel. So I think it's clarity on the new regime versus the old regime in terms of the amber to red and green, and how does how does it work with the figures in the sense of this current split versus the new split? Advising on the inclusion of residents as well on a new panel. And then it was Anthony's point about daytime meetings and their effectiveness and also comparators. And then just maybe anything to add on the support for an independent chair from the feedback you've had in the survey. And then we'll do one more round.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors. The point on the independent chair isn't to suggest that that's a member of Future Merton, it's someone who's independent of the council. And that's to bring us into line with every other design review panel in London and nationally, which is what the guidance we're following. So it's about having a design expert who not only chairs the meeting, but actually contributes to it and guides the conversation. What Merton does now is we do have a councillor chair. The chair has no active role in the review itself. They don't vote. It's just that they're there to run the meeting. So it's about getting that independent skills into it, but it wouldn't be any office, it wouldn't be us. It would be independent of the council. Paul, would you want to talk about the scoring, the red, amber, greens? Yeah.
Yeah, can I just clarify, Chair, with your point, Councillor, about the chair. Were you suggesting there's lay people as chair or lay people represented?
I think there was a point about how do you gauge, you've got experts there, but how do you actually gauge the local community and their feel for this design in that process? I know Dave will probably talk about that, but that's a separate bit to planning, and that's why you do it. Second bit.
Can you answering that?
Sorry, apologies, I forgot to respond to that. But question about local community representation on the panel itself. The panels are meant to be independent to look at design aspects of planning. The community already have a way in to comment on planning, which is at the planning application stage. The point, this is more relevant for pre-applications, which are held in private. That's because developers and councils need a safe space to get some harsh comments actually and get a scheme into shape before it's ready for the public to review it. So the pre-app always has been private. Councils are welcome to attend pre-app meetings, but the public aren't, and that's been common across the whole UK. So it's a planning application process that the community can get input to. What has worked well during COVID is we switched to online meetings. So we did just have members of the public coming for application reviews, but not pre-app. Councillors could come to either. Switching to online has been helpful, I think, because more members of the public can access those on YouTube than they ever could come into the council chamber for a meeting. And with the reviews, we have had councillors join during daytime. I wouldn't say I've seen a drop off at all. But feedback from councillors would be useful on that point. Yeah.
No. There are issues about how we inform all the relevant people sufficiently in advance, and quite happy to accept that needs to be improved, certainly.
And I think, yeah, there was the point about the ambers and greens, and then we'll do a second round with Daniel, myself, and one other colleague.
Okay, yeah. The issue around what we call the RAG rating is firstly, we've considered whether to do away with it, but there does seem to be a reasonable amount of support for it. However, the complaint, if you like, if you want to call it that, by panel members and by applicants to a degree, is that it's very, very easy to give an amber verdict. And so the stats which are in the report, which I read out, shows that over 50% come in at amber. And what panel members actually do in the meetings now is they're almost doing the four-stage verdict, saying this is amber, but it's closer to red, or it is amber, it's closer to green. And so what we wanted to try and do was to have an even number of stages, so you couldn't just plonk for the middle one. So it was concentrating the minds of the panel members and giving a more useful response to the applicant.
Thank you. So Dan, and then Nick, and then myself.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if the question was already asked about times. I think I missed a bit of the discussion, but my concern was about attendance in daytime. It's particularly difficult at times at only a day's notice to find out on Twitter from Mark Gale or other associated people about an agenda. So I'm really worried that you want to carry on with your approach of having your own website. And I think really this should be maintained by DEM services in the normal manner of all other committees. So we actually have a fair chance and the correct method to actually hear about these things in our ward, rather than relying on Twitter. In terms of timings of these, I share Councillor Fairclough's concern that it can be challenging for us to attend, and when it's short notice, it's incredibly difficult. I'm also concerned that you want to divorce any council involvement almost entirely from the process. The problem with the design review panel is they are considering applications that have a major impact on large parts of the borough, especially in Wimbledon, where, as we know, planning is a very emotive subject. I still think it's a role for council to provide a steer or guidance to developers, and we should have a facility to allow us to give a bit of flavour or background or a bit of a steer ourselves and to get a design that's more appropriate for the public as well. Just maybe being allowed to attend at short notice and then just observe only is not adequate, in my opinion, given how much sway the DRP has with the planning committee. So I think there needs to be better oversight, and I hope that's taken account of.
Thank you, Dan. Nick?
Yeah, very quickly. First of all, on precisely that point, 28 years, mainly as a councillor, and with very firm opinions of my own, and also having been subjected to, you know, representations from the public, people who vote for me, saying they're never going to vote for me again if I do something like that. We have to stay as far away from this process as we possibly can. And I think they're absolutely right. I think personally, we should be excluded from the process completely. The one thing that I'd say on this and on my other point is that I remember saying this to Paul a few years ago. The only qualifications that I have for this job is I got more votes than the other guy. The people who are on the DRP are immensely qualified. They know exactly what they're looking at. They know exactly what they're talking about. Councillors don't. We like to think we do, but we don't. That's just the reality of it. The other thing is, as a son of an artist, I'm sorry about this, Amber covers all kinds of things, and I know that the people who are actually sitting on this have all got artists in their blood as well, and they'll be confused, as will the public, by Amber going red and Amber going yellow, or Amber going green. I hate myself for saying this, but when the Conservatives were in charge, they actually developed a 4-colour system: red, yellow, green, blue, and frankly, whereas I don't know if we could do something like that. I think actually having a very distinct 4-colour system would be far more useful than what's actually put forward. Thanks.
Thank you. And then I've kind of got 3 questions building off what's already been mentioned. So just could you just give a bit of a flavour of how I noted in one section reference about future updates to the panel and how it works? And I appreciate a lot of this is through discussion and dialogue. How do you see further iterations going and the governance around that? That's 1. 2, I'm going to chart another way, a third way. What is the pros and cons against a binary approach? Does that not give the clarity you need, but also the planning committee the clarity it needs to, and avoid the sitting on the fence option? And predominantly talking about, going back to what Dan talked about, notice from of proceedings for councillors and general communication. What plans do you have to increase that? I'll give an example. Is there plans, I may have missed them in here, do draw my attention to them, that as part of your SOPs, you will automatically notify a councillor if there's something in their ward? Or is there, I noted a provision that said that councillors may not be invited to witness deliberations on items not in their ward. How do you see that working when the reality is we're a metropolitan diverse borough and wards don't have imaginary fences? So if there's a capability or facility in one end of the borough, there's a knock-on effect in its enjoyability from a design perspective or otherwise from residents living in the other. So just a bit of a recap. So we've got, see Dan's point about notice meetings, timings, and providing a steer from the democratic perspective. Nick's point about very clear colour coding on the 4 colour code arc, and my 3 points about sort of how do we, how do you update in future and iteration? Why not binary? And also communication engagement and the firewalls that seem to be constructed in this latest draft.
Okay, that's quite a lot. I'll try and take them in some logical form. The verdicts. I think what Councillor Draper said is quite helpful. We just wanted it to be 4. So to have a 4th colour and to then have text to describe it, excellent. We can work on that. It's not a problem, because it's just about having an even number rather than an odd number. You could have 2. I would sort of guard against that because it's quite stark, I guess, and it's the next step might be, well, not to have one at all. I don't know. So that's my take on that. Did you want to add, James?
Chair, I mean, I know that Councillor Ward's been looking to speak, so I don't know whether it'd be appropriate to, as Chair of PAC, to let you speak first, but there was just a couple of things that I thought it might be just useful to say prior to coming back on those.
Chair, I think that would be helpful because I want to deal with some of these issues. Firstly, I think it's a red herring that the council have raised about being able to attend design review panel for applications in their ward. My proposal would be that councillors are fully free to read a report post the meeting and not attend the meeting. The meeting should be separate from any democratic and councillor involvement. It's a technical meeting about the technical design standards of a proposed development, and the dynamic of the meeting and the members of the panel being able to discuss freely will be better, and they will have better discussions when there isn't a councillor listening in, possibly taking notes and possibly then using them and raising them when it comes to planning application committee. I think it should be entirely separate. There is, of course, within the planning process, within the consultation process, many opportunities for members of the public and their representation and their representatives as members of the council to get involved in the planning process and put their views forward. Design review panel is not one of those opportunities and should not be. It's a technical panel that looks at the quality and standards of the design of the proposed development. On the thing about Nick suggesting 4 different categories, I do have, because there is, as it stands, there is a tendency for people to say it's awful red, it's brilliant green, everything in between we give amber. So 4 could be, I think, something worth looking at and could be a better solution. The 2 is basically asking design review panel to recommend to planning applications committee whether they should pass it or not. It's a straight yes, no, and it will not work. It cannot work. The design review panel has an important role to play, but it is not there to recommend to the planning applications committee whether they should pass something or not. It is there to give its view on the quality of the design of the proposed building. And that's why the 2, it's got to stay separate. This is a technical panel, and the design and the planning applications committee is quasi-judicial and political and involves the public speaking at it and the public's representatives speaking at it, either as members of the panel or ward members speaking on things in their ward. The 2 things have to be kept separate. I think this report does that. It can be tightened in some ways in that way, but all these claims and requests for elected members and the public to be more involved is exactly the opposite direction that we want to go to. Less involved, actually completely out of this part of the process. We have many other ways of influencing the planning process. We should not be involved in any way in design review panel.
Thank you very much, Dave. If Anthony, we'll park that for a second. I think let's officers answer from their perspective as they brought the paper here to us.
I mean, I think it's just worthwhile saying that it goes without saying that the design review panel is regarded as being a force for good. It is optional, and the paper does say that one of the options is that we could have disbanded it. Actually, Merton was an early adopter, and I think we see the value of the work that's been done over many years and the quality that it's done. I think what's important just to reiterate is the function of design review panel is to advise, not to determine the outcome of the planning application. And there are a number of areas within the update that's being proposed that I think are learning from best practice right across not just London, but right across the country. And indeed, that's what the CABE input into this is. What we don't want is something where we end up with binary solutions that something is good or bad. The function of design review panel is to move something from poor or even mediocre to good. We want it to be something that's seen as being challenging, but at the same time supportive and constructive. And I think what we need to realise is that we want to do that far more at the pre-application stage, so it moves into better defined schemes when it comes into a planning application, rather than being one where the public in their representations have to pick through schemes. Officers should have the space to do that. And having been party to applications at Merton, I can tell you it's a damn robust process that they put us through. And a lot of it is very technical, and it's about the technical aspects as well as the aesthetic, because architecture in its completeness is look, feel, but it's also about the functionality of a building. And I think what we're trying to do in this report is say that there's a way that it's going to advise officers to get better design solutions, so that when we come through to actually getting planning applications in, a lot of the hard grunt is being done there. I think we'd commend all of the representatives that have come forward through the design review panel and input from members over that time. But I think best practice does evidence that there needs to be an element of independence. That's independent from Future Merton as well as from the development management team within the planning service. It will evolve. I think that, you know, there are some things I hear this evening around the timing, but what we want to do is to make it as agile as possible to work with the workflow of a planning application, and rather than it being something that's driven by the timetable of meetings. Those are things I think we'll need to see how it goes, and we're very happy to come back. And I think we probably need a good year of seeing how it runs through, Chair, on that. But it is based on best practice. But I think at its fundamental part, the role of the design and review panel is to increase the quality before it becomes an application. If we get duff applications in and they just don't listen, Planning Applications Committee are very good at dealing with that in a robust fashion.
Thank you very much. Just double checking that we've hit all the points before. Can I get just anyone commenting on the way the future construction panel would communicate with councillors? I mean, I'd hope Dave would agree that at least notifying a councillor or flagging a decision has been made is an appropriate way. And again, how do you see that divided over ward lines versus real world geography? Given, you know, a hypothetical example, you know, you could have a boundary and a bit of infrastructure is right on the other end of it, but everyone uses it across the borough. I'm just trying to give you an example here.
I mean, I think my response to that, Chair, would be that there are many examples of policy, strategy or projects that come forward that ward members' role is to look at the impact on their own ward area. It's for Cabinet to then take those in terms of the consultation that officers do or representations from residents within those wards. I think there are very few applications, I think, that we've referenced that are ones where I think have a borough-wide perspective. In fact, it's actually flagging up that the majority of ones are actually relatively small. I don't think that we have got any the requirement, I think, at this moment in time to say that a project, how would you determine whether or not it has a borough-wide focus? And I think that we wouldn't want to operate a system that sort of seeks to determine that, because then that becomes a binary issue. And I think given that it isn't something we've encountered before, we'd want to work with the flexibility if something like that came forward. If there was a piece of something that we might be regarded as, you know, regional or local infrastructure, I think there might be. But again, just to reiterate, there's a lot. The place for that is really around planning, the planning application itself. The design review panel is to advise on design, not necessarily the reason for it being there or the functionality of it being there. It's about the fact that, is it getting the best design in its locale. I think we'd be, in terms of communication with members, I think we'll need to take that on board, because I think what we want to make sure is that there's a greater transparency on the timing, a greater transparency in the results. In many ways, the proof of that is in the quality of the amended planning application. That's what members and residents want to see. But I think in terms of if we're going to have an agile system, we'll need to have a way of keeping members updated and then using that to cascade out to residents.
Brilliant. That's fantastic, and I know some members here are concerned with that. We'll take that on board. I think just to summarise, I mean, we've heard from yourselves the importance of flexibility, given that there is a considerable change that's going to happen. You want to bed that down, and I appreciate that, and also the importance that this is an independent committee. We've heard from the chair of the panel, from the plan application panel, the value that advice brings and its potential to grow that. And I see that's a fantastic opportunity. And obviously you've taken on board the need to just bring transparency around the outcomes of those meetings. And that's fantastic. I mean, we've talked about this now for a wee while. What I'm keen to do is, we've got one final item. So what I'm keen to do is now move on to a vote on agreeing the recommendations as they're on the paper. Conscious of the points that have been mentioned and the points that have been acknowledged and taken on board. Can I get hands in favour of agreeing the recommendations? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against? 1. All those not voting? Thank you very much. So they've been carried. What I would like to do, though, for the business plan, as possible, is to bring this back maybe in a year's time or just over, so that we can get an update on how how the process went, and no doubt some of the successes out of that, particularly on growing it and how that the new RAG rating, as it were, went. That'd be fantastic to hear some more detail on. Okay, so final. I think if I could we, what I would ask you to do is have to save that, because we moved on to a different item now. Nigel, we've moved on to a different item now. If we can move, and then you can maybe collar James afterwards for a very brief session. Well, if it's on a different subject, then it should be taken outside the meeting. But let's move on to the next item, which is item 8, which is. But it's, again, you can take it outside the meeting because it's not tabled. So if we can take the next item, which is smart cities. This is something that I was really keen to see on the agenda, because this is how this is the future direction of service delivery and how we use new technology to improve the great public service we already provide, but also provide further services and opportunities. I think we're going to get a presentation from Chris on this. Should I hand it over to you, Chris?
Chair, I think Paul McGarry's
apologies, Paul.
This item.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thank you, Chair. This report is it's an update on smart cities. Probably a bit odd to call it an update. It's an introduction, because we've never discussed it as a council or at this panel before. But the request of the panel as part of the annual work plan was to say what kind of smart cities activities are Merton implementing, what we learn from it, and what's the value from it. So the report sets out a number of activities underway through the council. Before we get into that, it's probably worthwhile starting with what is a smart city and what's the buzzword all about. It can really mean different things to different people. You know, the absolute massive scale cities are being built now as smart cities. You've got autonomous vehicles, you know, all of that big futuristic stuff. But at a more local level, it can be as simple as when you now get a delivery to your house, you get a text telling you whether your parcel's delivered. You can stand at a bus stop on your phone now and know when the bus is coming. So all of that is smart city tech as well. And fundamentally, it's all about making people's lives easier. And for local authorities, it's about what can we do, or either with systems or with data, to make residents' lives easier, to make our job more efficient, and actually identify where we can invest or make investment when it's needed. So the current activities covered in the report, I won't go through them all in massive detail because it's in the report and it's already 9:30, but I will leave room for questions. Most of the activity today is part of the Innovate project. So that's the South London Partnership project, which they won some funding, and we're in partnership with Richmond, Wandsworth, Sutton, and the neighbouring boroughs. And a lot of that was really to bring investment in to introduce a number of sensors around the borough to gather data. And that data is there to influence how we deliver our services and improve lives for residents. So currently the rollout, even a couple of months ago, we've rolled out air quality sensors around the borough. Now, we did have air quality monitoring before, but that was the diffusion tubes, which give you a picture over a longer period of time. The new sensors actually give you in real time data on the quality of air quality in Merton. We've also partnered with Vivacity Labs, and there are traffic sensors that have gone up around the borough. They're currently at the borough boundary, so we can track cars who are coming in and then out of Merton again to give us the through traffic. And also we get sensors around key locations in the borough where we want to track footfall, for example, high streets, or neighbourhoods where residents have told us already they think there's a problem with traffic. And that helps us gather data, which will either substantiate residents' claims or gives a completely different picture of something we didn't know about before. So the Vivacity, the traffic sensors are really getting a lot of interest from resident groups so far. Something we've had for a while as part of the highway contract renewal 2 years ago was Gully Sensors. So in the drains in the high risk flood areas of Merton, we've got sensors in the drains. Now, they don't suddenly beep to tell us there's a flood happening, but what they do tell the council is if the pot has filled up halfway with sludge, we know we need to go and clean it. And we pass them to Veolia and they proactively go and clean the gullies before a flood event happens to minimise flood risk when it does occur. We've also got a rollout of things like parking bay sensors. So they're rolling out now, and that will give, for blue badge and disabled customers, the ability to log onto an app and see what bays are available before you drive there, or on your sat nav, you would know where you're going. And so it's a bit of a trial. There's also some of the council car parks we're trialing that in as well, so that via the apps you can know what car parks have spaces available, and if one's full, you know to drive to another. There's also examples in social care deployment as well in the report. And one of the new ones, which I think is probably the most innovative one, is the e-commerce app. E-commerce sounds quite dry, but this is all part of our high street recovery and modernisation. We've just partnered with a company called Bubbletown, so that was put through a tender, and we developed an app called Merton Local, and that will be launching probably in the next month. And what that does is, I mean, to put it crudely, it's a bit like the food delivery apps that you get, without naming brand names, and voucher websites that you also get. It kind of mashes them together. So local businesses across Merton will be able to log onto the app for free, publicise their business and publicise vouchers, deals, special offers to residents who then use the app. There's a second stage of that where if businesses want to pay a fee, so it's free to join, but if they want to pay a fee, businesses can then sell their own goods on the app. And there's functionality in there, for example, where, say, a business on a high street wanted to sell something to residents, the delivery driver apps can actually deliver that around Merton. So it's a way of giving Merton independent businesses an online presence without them having to learn how to set up a website. It also lets our residents know what's actually on the local high street without actually going there. So you get more awareness of what offer is and just give more publicity to the high street. So it's not a full digitisation of the high street, but it really emphasises the wide range of good businesses that are in Merton that many residents might not know. So we'll be launching Merton Local over the next month, initially to get businesses to sign up and then residents to sign up as well. I think I'll happy to pause there, but I'll take questions from the panel on this. I know it's quite a wide range of subject.
No, thank you very much, Paul. I've got a question, but I'll just throw it first open to the panel if there's any questions or comments. So we've got Nick, Lakshmi, and then I'll go to me. And then, actually, no, Nick, Lakshmi, and then Dan. Nick.
I'm not sure whether I wanted to be first, but I just wanted to say how I love the idea of Gully Sensors. It just knocks dead in the water all those things about Merton don't ever clean out their drains. Well, of course we do, and it's lovely to see the work that you're doing on that. And I'm also very, very interested in, first of all, the parking bay sensors. I mean, from what I read here, we're going to have 500 individual bay sensors compared to Sutton's 42 and Richmond and Wandsworth together 150. I've got to say, we're the greenest borough now. That's really cool. And last of all, you know, I do like the idea of the social care stuff. It's still obviously very, very early stages there, but I'd be very, I'm a little bit jealous now because it'd be interesting to see how this develops over the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
I just wondered if, is this, are you also monitoring footfall into the parks during the day and night? Is that something that it can be used for?
And then Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for that. I'm quite interested in the traffic and air quality sensors. I just want to ask, first question, are they all installed, and the ones that I've been asking for, especially for my ward, have they been put in? The second one is about bringing the public. The smart cities idea sounds quite good. I like the sound of making life easier, but some people are very nervous about impacts of using 5G technology, for instance, and other such things. Are very worried about that. So how do we bring people along? And also how much of this technology will have an impact on tree level? Because I wouldn't want technology to come along which then requires trees to be cut down everywhere. So those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Cheers, Dan. So just recapping, so we're talking about how to using the telephone, the wavelength network. So 5G is the latest network. There will be a 6 and 7 to best use, and making sure that the infrastructure around suits that. And also your point about installation of the air quality sensors across the borough. Lakshmi's point about can this be used to monitor footfall in parks? And I think Nick's general point, which I would echo, it's great to see this come on the agenda, and I've got some points on how do we materialize this into more of a program project. I'll leave that there for you to answer.
Thank you. In terms of the sensors, we don't have any in parks. I'm aware of it as more highways and streets at the moment. The technology is capable of counting footfall. I think in parks, it probably wouldn't work at night unless there was lights there, because the cameras rely on seeing things. So it's on the highways with street lighting. But the technology is there, it could be done, but I don't think we have any in parks at the moment. In terms of the data, what the sensors use and how we get the data, it's through 4G, so it's the normal mobile phone network, it's not 5G. If anyone's concerned with 5G, Public Health England, they put a statement out there about the low risk of it. There's no risk of it according to Public Health England, so we've got no reason to think anything otherwise than that. All the air quality sensors are in the report. There's a link to the webpage so you can see where all the air quality sensors are in the borough and the data coming out of them in real time, and residents can see that too. With the traffic ones, there are 4 still to go. We did make a late request probably a couple of months ago, which Councillor Holden's aware of, for East Hill sites, and we've updated residents saying we think they'll be in by May, April, May. We've had to power up some other lamp columns to get them in and move them around, so they're delayed. Not delayed, they were a late request, but we're anticipating to get them in to count traffic in Hillside, because we know residents are either keen on an LTN or just want to know to get the data. I mean, I can only speak for the highway data because that's what I'm looking at in my service, but it is fascinating, and we've done meetings with residents where we've flashed up on the screen the data we can see. It's great for footfall. We get monthly monitoring reports from Vivacity Labs. I would have shared it, but the January report came in after these reports were submitted, but I'm happy to share it with panel members after. And it's beginning to show an uptick, so a kind of COVID recovery. We're seeing a bit more traffic, more footfall on high streets, and more cycling. So that trend from beginning of January to end of January is growing. So it gives us a bit of data about how the borough's performing, which we wouldn't have known before. And certainly in terms of traffic, it's probably backing up what residents tell us, and it's reaffirming what we kind of know and sense what's going on in the borough anyway in terms of traffic. So I think the data really helps. Going forward about how we use all this, a lot of the sensors are just in. We need to let them run for a while to get the trend analysis out of all that. But it will hopefully help shape where we put our capital investment, certainly for highways. For parking, it'll let us know where the demand is and where it isn't, and maybe that may affect pricing and charging. So I think there is a question about what do we do once all this data is in. There isn't an analyst at the moment. We're getting a lot of that automatically, but I think there is a role to say, well, Does the council want to keep this going forward? Is it useful? How do we get to grips with analysing all that data once we have it? But at the moment, we're just at the very start. Sorry, the other one in terms of trees, no impact on trees here.
I think that's reassuring. So I think Nigel had a question and I've got a question, and then we'll just wrap up on this. Nigel? I think that's a good question. It's something I was going to build off. And actually building on that more generally, what are the, Nigel's point about your analytics capacity, what do you see as potential risks moving forward in sense of, well, I phrase this another way, how is this being collectively organised within the council, and what are the risks and opportunities that the current approach is representing for your particular work when you talk about highways?
Thank you. In terms of the first question there, I think the example was section 2.23. We've given examples of the graphs and data we can get from the traffic sensors. If you like data, it's good to look at, but it's a very fair point. What do we do with all that data going forward as an analytics team? There's not an analytics team at the moment, but we are looking at that. The approach at the moment in Merton is there is a link to IT because they need to make sure these systems integrate with their systems, but it's down to each service area. So for example, air quality, we'll be looking at the air quality sensors, I'll be looking at traffic, parking will be looking at parking. So each service area will be looking to see how they manage that data and whether we can resource the analytics within our own team rather than having a whole council-wide analytics team, because it is relevant to each service area. I think it will be relevant as well for a couple of points to give the examples. When we come to do our service plans, I know it's the wrong time of year now, but we usually do that in autumn. We often look to see what the demands on each service. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it changing? And certainly during COVID, we saw a huge change in highways, demand for active travel and investment. So I think the data will show dividends in how we actually work with the service plans going forwards. Similarly, like the air quality, the council is going to do a new air quality action plan. We will have this data from the air quality sensors, which will influence where and how hard we go on some of the air quality measures. So I think it will play into each individual team rather than a council-wide digital strategy at this stage, but you can perhaps see that's the direction of travel it may go. Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. Are there any further comments, questions? No? Thank you, Paul, and thank you, team. Sorry, I did see Chris, you had your hand up a bit earlier on. Apologies if I missed you. No, fine, cool. What I want to do then is actually, if we would support recommendation A and B, but I've got a recommendation C to add if the panel would endure me. And basically I would ask that a feasibility study be commissioned at looking at what other boroughs do in this smart city area and how they organise themselves, more importantly, so that we can be in the best shape to take advantage of these new approaches. As Paul said, there raises questions on analytics, but also how do you put this into business planning, and we don't want to miss an opportunity. Can I get a seconder to include that on the 3? Dave, thank you very much. So can I have a vote in favour for all 3 recommendations as outlined? Agreed. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. So the final item, work programme, as you can see, next time on March, we've got a call in, and also we're taking planning enforcement as one of the main topics. And I'm just going to close the meeting now. Thank you very much, everyone, and take care.